The evening was colder than usual when I stood outside Daniel's house, my hands trembling, not from the chill, but from disbelief. I had raised that boy since he was 8 years old, fed him, clothed him, and taught him what it meant to be loved when the world had given him nothing. And yet, there I was, standing on his porch, staring at the closed door that moments ago had slammed in my face. The echo still rang in my ears, like a cruel reminder of how fragile love can be. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never imagined that the same child who once ran into my arms calling me Dad would someday turn me away like a stranger begging for scraps. As I stood there, the sound of laughter drifted from inside his home, his real family now, the one he'd built without me. My heart ached. I didn't want to be jealous, but I was. I was hurt, forgotten, and replaced. The rain began to fall, thin drops at first, then heavy sheets that soaked through my coat. I stood frozen, staring at that wooden door, unable to move. My mind traveled back decades to the day I first met Daniel. He had been a thin, quiet boy sitting on the steps of the community center, hugging a torn backpack to his chest. His mother, Clara, was one of my co-workers, a kind woman who struggled to raise her son after her husband abandoned them. I'd see Daniel often when she brought him to work, and every time, he'd sit silently in the corner while the other children played. Something about him drew me in. Maybe it was his loneliness, or maybe I saw a reflection of my younger self. One evening as I was leaving, I found him sitting by the road crying. His mother was still inside, finishing her shift. I knelt beside him and asked, "What's wrong, son?" He looked up at me with eyes too old for his age and said softly, "The kids say I don't have a dad." That simple sentence pierced my heart. Without thinking, I put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Well, you've got me now, don't you?" He looked surprised, then smiled through his tears. "Really?" I nodded. "Really." From that day forward, we were inseparable. Clara became like family to me. I'd take Daniel fishing on weekends, teach him how to ride a bike, help him with homework. On his birthdays, I'd save up to buy him little gifts, nothing fancy, but enough to make him feel special. And every Father's Day, he'd give me a handmade card that said, "To the best dad I could ever have." I kept every one of those cards in a wooden box in my drawer. They were my treasure. Years passed, and our bond grew stronger. I watched him become a bright, determined young man. When Clara fell sick, I stayed by her side until the end. Her final words to me were, "Please look after him, John. He trusts you more than anyone." I promised her I would, and I kept that promise. I worked double shifts to pay for his college tuition. I gave him the savings I had meant for my retirement. When he got his first job, I was the proudest man alive. But something changed when he met Lisa. She was charming, ambitious, and from a wealthy family. I liked her at first. She brought out a confidence in Daniel I hadn't seen before. But as their relationship deepened, I began to notice how she looked down on me, how she'd wrinkle her nose when I showed up in my old truck or wore my work clothes to dinner. "You're like a father to him," she once said. "But it's time he starts thinking about his own family now." I laughed it off, but her words lingered. Then came the day Daniel told me he was moving to the city. He said it like a victory, like it was the next big step in his life. I hugged him, wished him well, and helped him pack. I even gave him the old wristwatch I'd inherited from my father, a family heirloom I wanted him to have. "Whenever you look at it," I told him, "remember where you came from." He smiled and said, "I always will." But promises made in comfort are easily forgotten in comfort. Months passed with only the occasional phone call. Then the calls stopped altogether. Birthdays came and went without a word. When I finally tried visiting him, Lisa greeted me at the door. Her smile was polite but cold. "Daniel's busy," she said. "Maybe next time." There was no next time, until tonight. Tonight, I stood outside that same house, my breath visible in the night air, holding a small gift in my hand. I wasn't here to ask for money or help. I just wanted to see him. I'd fallen recently, hurt my leg badly, and the doctor said I'd need a few weeks of rest. I thought maybe my boy would let me stay for a while, just until I got better. It wasn't pride that brought me here. It was hope. But hope has a cruel way of turning into heartbreak. When Daniel opened the door, surprise flashed across his face, followed by discomfort. "Dad?" he said softly. Lisa appeared behind him, frowning. "John, what are you doing here?" Her voice was sharp. Annoyed, I explained everything. The fall, the injury, my doctor's warning. "I just need a place to rest for a bit," I said. "Only until I'm better." Daniel hesitated. For a moment, I saw the boy I once knew, the one who used to cling to my arm and call me his hero. But then Lisa crossed her arms. "Daniel, we can't. We have guests coming next week, and it's not appropriate." He looked down, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe you can check into a clinic or something," he muttered. The words hit harder than any blow. "A clinic?" I repeated. "Son, I just wanted a roof over my head for a few days." Lisa sighed loudly. "John, you've done enough for him. Let him live his life now." That's when Daniel gently but firmly closed the door. I heard the lock click, and just like that, 30 years of love and sacrifice ended with the sound of a door closing. I stood there for a long time, staring at that door as if it might open again. Maybe he'd come back out. Maybe he'd say it was a mistake, that he was sorry, that he didn't mean it. But the only sound I heard was the rain, washing over the driveway, hitting the roof, whispering its cold song against the window where I could still see the faint light inside. I turned away slowly, my heart heavy, my body trembling not from the chill but from a hollow ache that reached deep into my bones. As I walked down the path, I could see my reflection in a puddle, an old man with stooped shoulders, wet hair clinging to his forehead, a shadow of the man who once believed that love could never fade. I had believed that family was something unbreakable, something built from the heart. But that night, I realized how fragile love could be when weighed against pride, status, and convenience. I reached the bus stop at the end of the street, shivering under the flickering streetlight. The last bus had already passed. I sat down on the cold metal bench and closed my eyes. Memories flooded in, Daniel running to me with scraped knees, Daniel holding up his first report card, Daniel's laughter echoing through the park as I pushed him on the swing. Each memory felt like a knife, sharp and sweet. I had loved him with everything I had, and now I was nothing but a ghost haunting the edges of his life. When I finally made it home, my small apartment felt emptier than ever. The silence was unbearable. I placed the small gift I'd brought, a photo frame with a picture of us fishing years ago, on the table. I stared at it for a long time before finally turning away. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed, thinking of all the times I had been there for him, wondering if any of it had mattered. The next morning, I woke up to the pain in my leg reminding me that I wasn't young anymore. The doctor had been right. I needed rest. But rest was hard when your mind wouldn't stop. I picked up the phone, thinking about calling him again. Maybe he'd answer this time. Maybe he'd change his mind. But before I could dial, I put the phone down. I couldn't beg for love. Not again. The following days passed in a blur. I kept myself busy with little things, watering the plants, fixing an old chair, reading the newspaper even though the words barely registered. But every now and then, I'd glance at that photo frame, and the memories would come rushing back. I remembered the promise I made to Clara. I had fulfilled it, hadn't I? I had raised him, given him everything, loved him like my own. I had kept my word, but something inside me refused to let go. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was pain, or maybe it was that deep, stubborn love that doesn't fade even when it's not returned. I decided that if Daniel could forget me so easily, then perhaps I needed to remind him, not with anger or bitterness, but with something he couldn't ignore. The following weekend, I wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, but to myself, to remind me who I was before life made me small. I wrote about the years I'd spent building a life for someone else, about the sacrifices I'd made willingly, about the joy and pain of being a father without ever being called one by blood. I poured my heart onto that page, and when I finished, I realized what I needed to do. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I had spent too long living for others, giving until there was nothing left. But this rejection, it had woken something in me. I was still alive, still capable, still more than the old man they thought I was. If Daniel and Lisa believed I was weak, dependent, or pitiful, then it was time to remind them, and myself, of what real strength looked like. Over the next few weeks, I began to change. I started walking every morning, slowly at first, then longer each day. I joined a local community group at the senior center. I volunteered to teach woodworking, something I hadn't done since my younger days. The first day I walked into that room full of unfamiliar faces, I felt nervous, like a child again. But as soon as I picked up the tools, something inside me clicked. My hands remembered what my heart had never forgotten. The other seniors watched as I showed them how to shape, smooth, and polish wood into something beautiful. Their laughter, their gratitude, their stories, they filled the emptiness that had been growing in me. For the first time in years, I felt needed again. Not because someone depended on me, but because I still had something to give. A few weeks later, one of the younger volunteers approached me after class. "Mr. John," she said, "you should share your work online. People love stories like yours." I chuckled at the thought. "Who'd want to see an old man carving wood?" I asked. But she insisted and helped me create an account on social media. She filmed me teaching, uploaded short clips, and before I knew it, people were watching, commenting, thanking me for inspiring them. Messages began pouring in, people saying how they missed their fathers, how they wished they'd appreciated their parents more. One message read, "You remind me of my dad. He used to build things just like that. I miss him every day." Reading those words made my eyes sting. That night, I realized that while Daniel had turned away from me, the world still had room for the love I had to give. But then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, as I was finishing a class, a young man approached me. He was holding his phone awkwardly, like he didn't know what to say. "You're the guy from the videos, right?" he asked. I nodded. "You're kind of famous now. My mom watches you all the time. She says you're like the dad everyone wishes they had." I smiled, thanking him. But inside, I felt something shift. I hadn't set out to become anything special. I just wanted to heal. But the more I shared my life, the more I found that people needed to hear from someone like me. Someone who had lived, lost, and still kept going. It wasn't long before local media picked up my story. They called me the carpenter with a father's heart. It was a strange title, but it fit. My videos reached thousands. Strangers called me Dad in the comments. The same words that Daniel once said now came from people I'd never met. It was bittersweet, but healing. Then, one evening, as I was closing my workshop, I got a message request on my phone. I opened it and froze. It was from Daniel. For a long time, I just stared at the message notification. His name looked strange on my screen. Familiar, yet distant. Like a word from a language I hadn't spoken in years. My hands trembled slightly as I tapped it open. The message was short, almost too short for the weight it carried. "Hi, John. I saw your videos. Can we talk?" Just 8 words, but they hit me harder than any storm. A part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the one that still remembered the laughter of a boy who once called me his hero, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment I'd been waiting for. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying our last encounter, the sound of the door slamming, his cold eyes. I asked myself if I could ever forgive him. I'd built a new life, found new purpose, and yet the wound still ached. Forgiveness wasn't as simple as people said. It wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a choice you had to make over and over again. The next morning I replied, "Yes, Daniel, we can talk." He called later that day. For a few seconds after I picked up, neither of us spoke. I could hear his breathing on the other end, quick, uneasy, uncertain. Finally, he said, "I've been watching your videos. You've really changed." I chuckled softly. Maybe. Or maybe I just remembered who I used to be. There was silence again. Then, he said something that surprised me. "Dad, I'm sorry." The word Dad caught in my chest. It was the first time he'd said it in years, maybe ever. I swallowed hard. "You don't have to call me that," I said gently. But he insisted. "No, I do. You were there when no one else was. I don't know what I was thinking that night." His voice cracked. "I was angry, stressed, but that's no excuse. I treated you horribly." For a moment, all the walls I had built to protect myself started to crumble. I wanted to forgive him right then, to tell him it was okay. But forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about pretending the pain never happened. It was about acknowledging it and choosing to move past it. "I appreciate that, Daniel," I said quietly. "It means more than you know. but I think we both need time. Let's meet. Talk properly." He agreed. We decided to meet that weekend at a small cafe near the lake where we used to go fishing when he was a boy. When I arrived, I saw him already there, sitting by the window, fidgeting with his coffee cup. He looked older, tired. I suppose I did too. When he saw me, he stood up awkwardly. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, sitting down. For a while, neither of us knew what to say. It was as if years of silence had built a wall between us, and we were both afraid to take the first step toward tearing it down. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I saw what people said about you online," he said. "They love you. You've changed so many lives." I smiled faintly. "I didn't do much. I just told the truth." He looked down. "I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you until I saw how kind you were to everyone else. You gave to strangers what I took for granted." I sighed softly. We all forget sometimes. The ones closest to us often see our worst sides. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "When I shut that door, I didn't know it would haunt me. Lisa left me, you know. Things fell apart, and all I could think about was how I'd pushed away the only real father I ever had." Hearing that made my chest tighten. I reached across the table, placed my hand over his. "Daniel," I said quietly, "life has a way of teaching us what truly matters. Maybe this was your lesson, and mine too." We talked for hours after that, about Clara, about his childhood, about the life we'd both lived apart. There were tears, laughter, awkward pauses, and moments of deep silence. When we finally stood to leave, he hugged me, not a polite, distant hug, but one that felt real. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. As I walked home that evening, I realized that forgiveness hadn't just healed him, it had healed me. The bitterness that had lived inside me for so long began to fade. I had learned that love, when genuine, never truly dies. It just waits quietly for the right moment to return. In the weeks that followed, Daniel started visiting often. Sometimes he'd help me with my projects. Other times he'd just sit and listen. We began recording videos together, father and son, side by side, building things, sharing stories. The audience loved it. But for me, it wasn't about views or fame anymore. It was about time. The kind we had lost and were now slowly reclaiming. One afternoon, as we were finishing a piece of furniture, Daniel said, "I wish Mom could see this." I smiled softly. "She'd be proud, Daniel, of both of us." He looked at me, eyes shining. "I never really thanked you." "For everything?" "You don't have to," I replied. "Just live a good life." "That's thanks enough." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw peace in his eyes. Months passed. Life found a rhythm again, simple, steady, filled with quiet joy. And yet, there were moments when I'd sit on the porch, watching the sunset, thinking of all the turns life had taken. Love lost and found, pain endured, forgiveness earned. It struck me how unpredictable life could be, and how every heartbreak could also be a door to something better. Then, one morning, as I scrolled through my messages, I found a letter waiting in my inbox. It was from someone named Michael, a young man from another country. He wrote, "Mr. John, I lost my father last year. Your stories reminded me to forgive him. Thank you for helping me heal." Tears filled my eyes as I read it. I realized that sometimes the pain we go through isn't just for us. It's so we can help others find their way through theirs. That's when it truly hit me. What Daniel had taken from me that night wasn't love, it was trust. But what life had given back was far greater: purpose. I no longer needed validation from the people who had left me behind. I had something better, a reason to keep living, to keep teaching, to keep loving. As I set down my phone, Daniel walked into the room, smiling. "Ready for today's video, Dad?" I smiled back, warmth filling my chest. "Always, son." And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt whole again. I didn't sleep that night. The image of his door closing in my face kept replaying in my mind, like a cruel echo that refused to fade. Every creak of my old wooden floor reminded me of the silence that followed his rejection. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, my heart heavy but not yet broken. No, not yet. I had seen too much in life to let one man's coldness bury my spirit. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. It hurt in a way that no physical wound ever could. I raised him from the time he was a scared little boy. I taught him how to tie his shoes, how to shake hands firmly, how to look a man in the eye and keep his word. I was there through scraped knees and graduation speeches, through heartbreaks and promotions. I wasn't his blood, but I was his foundation. And yet, when the winds of hardship finally blew my way, he vanished like smoke. The next morning, I made myself a cup of weak coffee and stared at the framed photo on my kitchen wall, the two of us, smiling, on the day he got his first car. My gift to him, my last savings, gone without a thought, because I believed in him. I had believed that love, even one not bound by blood, meant something that lasted. I was wrong, but life has a strange way of returning what you give, not always through the same people, but through moments, through strangers, through fate itself. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No name, just a university crest on the envelope. Inside, a handwritten note from one of my old students, a boy I had tutored for free years ago when his father lost his job. Mr. Harris, it began. You once told me that every good deed plants a seed in the soil of time. I wanted you to know that your seeds grew. I've started a community center for elderly folks who live alone. We'd be honored if you'd come by. We could use your wisdom. I stared at the letter, and for the first time in days, I smiled. My old heart stirred with something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. That night, I pressed my shirt, polished my shoes, and the next morning, I walked down to that little building on Maple Avenue. It was small, painted a hopeful blue, with laughter spilling out through its open doors. Inside, I saw faces, some wrinkled, some young, all filled with the kind of warmth I thought the world had forgotten. And there, standing at the front, was the young man from the letter, now all grown up. When he saw me, his face lit up like sunrise. "Mr. Harris, you came!" He hugged me tight, and something inside me cracked open, the part that had gone cold after my so-called son turned away. This boy, this man, remembered. He carried my lessons in his heart when the one I'd raised from my own hands had thrown them away. For weeks, I helped around the center, teaching, fixing old chairs, listening to stories that no one else had time for. Every day, I felt lighter, stronger. The pain that once felt like a chain began to feel like a forge, shaping me into something new. Then, one afternoon, as I swept the front porch, a car pulled up, a shiny black SUV, windows tinted, the kind of car that screams money, success, pride. And out stepped him, the man I had once called my son. His face looked different now, tired, thinner, eyes filled with something that looked an awful lot like guilt. "Mr. Harris," he said softly. He couldn't even meet my eyes. "I heard you were here." I leaned on my broom, silent, waiting. The air between us was thick. Around us, the laughter from inside drifted faintly, the sound of the life I'd rebuilt without him. He took a step closer. I messed up. When you came to my door, I was scared. Things weren't going well, and I thought you'd judge me. But when I saw your picture in the paper last week, helping these people, I realized I was the one who needed you all along." He paused, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry, Dad." That word, Dad. It landed like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. My heart wanted to forgive, but my soul wanted truth. "You shut a door, son," I said finally. "And when you close a door on someone's heart, sometimes it locks from the inside." He bowed his head, tears glinting in his eyes. The people inside had come out now, watching silently from the porch. I could feel the weight of all the years, all the love, all the hurt pressing down between us. Then I did something that surprised even me. I reached out, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, "You can come in, but this time you'll have to earn your way back, not with words, but with actions." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I will, I promise." And just like that, the tension broke. The sound of laughter returned, and I led him inside, into the very place that had given me back my purpose. As he looked around, shaking hands and helping serve lunch, I saw a flicker of the boy I once knew, before pride, before success, before he forgot who he was. By evening, when the sun cast its golden glow across the room, he turned to me and said, "You built something beautiful here, Dad." I smiled faintly. "No, son. We did. We always did, even when you forgot." Outside, the town bell rang, echoing through the streets, a reminder that no matter how late it gets, redemption is always on time. That night, as I walked home under the orange glow of the streetlights, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. The kind that doesn't come from success or applause, but from knowing that you did what was right, even when it broke your heart. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it faint laughter from the center behind me. I turned once more to look. Through the window, I saw him, still there, helping clean up after dinner. Not because anyone asked him to, but because he wanted to. For the first time since that door slammed in my face, I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe life had a way of teaching lessons none of us could escape. Not even the ones who thought they already knew everything. Days passed, then weeks. The center became a second home. The community grew. More volunteers, more stories, more warmth. I watched people who had been forgotten by their families find laughter again. Some called me Mr. Harris. Others called me Grandpa. But no matter what they called me, I felt something I'd lost for so long: belonging. And then came the day everything came full circle. It was a Saturday morning. We were hosting a small gathering, a fundraiser for the center. The room buzzed with energy. Tables full of homemade pies, knitted scarves, and smiling faces. The mayor was even there, shaking hands, promising more support. I stood near the doorway, leaning on my cane, watching it all unfold, when he, my son, stepped up to the microphone. He looked nervous. His hands trembled as he held the mic, glancing around the crowd until his eyes found mine. For a second, time stood still. Then he took a breath and began to speak. "I want to tell you all a story," he said, voice cracking slightly. "When I was a kid, I didn't have much, but I had one man who believed in me. He wasn't my father by blood, but he showed me what a real father was, through every act of kindness, every lesson, every sacrifice. Years later, I forgot that. I let pride, success, and fear turn me into someone I didn't even recognize." The room had gone completely silent. Even the kids stopped fidgeting. He continued, "One night, when he came to me for help, I turned him away. I slammed the door on the very man who built me. But when I saw what he built here, this center, this family, I realized something. Blood doesn't make family. Love does. And love, it's something I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve again." He turned to me, eyes glistening. "Mr. Harris, Dad, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." Applause filled the room, rising like thunder. I stood frozen, heart pounding, throat tight. I'd imagined hearing words like that so many times, but never thought I actually would. Slowly, I made my way to the front. My old legs shook, but my heart guided me forward. When I reached him, he didn't wait. He stepped off the stage and wrapped his arms around me. And right there, in front of everyone, the years of pain, regret, and silence melted away. When the crowd cheered, it wasn't just for us. It was for every person who had ever been forgotten, every parent left behind, every elder who thought love had passed them by. It was for forgiveness, the kind that takes a lifetime to earn. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the quiet hall. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed. I could still smell the faint trace of coffee and laughter. My son walked over and sat beside me. "Dad," he said softly, "I want to make things right. I don't want to just visit now and then. I want to be part of your life, for real." I looked at him, his face full of sincerity, and smiled. "Then start by showing up," I said. "Not for me, for yourself. Learn what it means to stay when things aren't easy. That's where love lives." He nodded. "I will." We sat there in silence for a while. Outside, the moonlight spilled across the street, pale and soft. I thought about all the years I'd spent feeling empty, waiting for something that might never come. And yet, here it was. Not perfect, not easy, but real. The next morning he came by early, coffee in hand, ready to help repair one of the old benches out front. We worked side by side, not saying much. We didn't need to. Every nail, every board, every shared glance said what words couldn't. We're rebuilding. As the sun climbed higher, people started arriving. The usual crowd of elders, neighbors, volunteers. The laughter returned, the music played, and for the first time in a long time, I felt young again. I looked around at the faces, some old, some new, all full of life, and realized that love doesn't vanish just because people fail you. It waits, it endures, it finds new homes. Later, as I sat on the porch watching everyone mingle, my son came out with 2 cups of lemonade. He handed me one and said with a grin, "You know, Dad, I used to think strength was about having power. But you taught me it's about standing tall even when no one's clapping." I laughed softly. "Took you long enough to learn that," he chuckled. And for a moment, we were just 2 souls sitting in the warmth of forgiveness, surrounded by the sound of life continuing. When the day ended, I wrote something in my old journal, something I'd want anyone listening to remember. When love fails you, don't let bitterness build walls. Let wisdom build bridges. The ones who hurt you may never see your worth, until life reminds them who taught them what worth really means. As the sun set behind the trees, I closed my eyes and smiled. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was proof that kindness can survive betrayal, that time can heal pride, and that sometimes the family you build through love is stronger than the one you're born into. Because in the end, forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. And freedom, that's what I had finally found.